Hello farmers, I'm Remy Del Mare, professional hyperfixationist. It would be an understatement to say that Harvest Moon Animal Parade is considered by many to be the best game in the Story of Seasons, formerly known as Harvest Moon, series. And with good reason. Upon revisiting it after so many years, I found myself really enthralled with it. Recent Story of Seasons games have felt a bit hollow, so going back to this game reminded me what it was that made me fall in love with farming sims to begin with. It's not perfect by any means, but it gets pretty darn close all things considered. And in my eyes, it's the most balanced game in the series without question. While I'm mainly focusing on Animal Parade in this video, it's more accurate to say that this is a comparison video between Tree of Tranquility and Animal Parade. The time frame in which they were released was so short, and they share so many similarities, that it's nearly impossible not to compare them. And although Animal Parade does build upon a lot of what Tree of Tranquility brought to the table, there are many places where I felt that Tree of Tranquility did certain things better, and I want to give it the flowers that it deserves. Tree of Tranquility deserves more credit than it gets, and I know that a lot of people skip over it because Animal Parade is the quote-unquote better version, but you never know. Depending on what you prefer in a farming sim, it might actually be more up your alley. There are certain features in Animal Parade that put it a step above for me, but it may not be the case for everyone. So I'm gonna do my best to talk about what I think are the main differences between the two games, and if you haven't played either game, I'm sure that one of them will appeal to you. Without further ado, let's begin by diving into the game's visuals. It should come as no surprise if you've played Tree of Tranquility that the visuals in this game are a feast for the eyes. Tree of Tranquility looked great. Animal Parade only stepped its game up even more. Mika Nunokawa does it again with the upgraded character designs. It's a bit subtle, but if you look at the character designs from Tree of Tranquility, you can see that they were a lot more rustic in comparison. The new designs are softer and more polished, and even the in-game graphics and character models look more detailed compared to Tree of Tranquility. I really like how well proportioned the models look. It's a vast improvement from Magical Melody's round and chibi-like models, and the stocky models used in A Wonderful Life. I particularly like these changes because you can see, with tremendous detail, all of the bells and whistles on your character's outfits. No spoilers, but I will be gushing about that later. Animal Parade released only a year after Tree of Tranquility, on October 30th, 2008 here in the States, and it features the same cast of characters for the most part. They could have easily used the same models and called it a day, but they didn't. Not only did the character models get a visual overhaul, the entire island itself was changed from top to bottom. The town layout is completely different, and all the locations on the island were rearranged. They even added in new locations to explore, like the Fugu Forest that did not exist in Tree of Tranquility. You can tell that they really wanted to push the visual limits in this game as far as they possibly could. All the locations are stunning, especially during the winter. It is truly chef's kiss. The only downside to that is that there's a bit of lag as you move from one area to the next. Overall though, I tend to prefer the map layout in Tree of Tranquility. It feels more cozy to me, and the lag is pretty noticeable at times in Animal Parade, especially if you're switching back and forth between games like I was. But I do admire the ambition they had to differentiate the game from Tree of Tranquility, since they do share the same cast. It wouldn't be the first or the last time that they took the cast of one game and put them in a somewhat different setting, but that's a topic for another video. To me, it's the most visually impressive game in the entire series. I do think that the A Wonderful Life remake gets pretty close, but the valley is so small that it can't compare to the scope of the island in Animal Parade to me. If we do get a remake, I'm really looking forward to seeing how they modernize the style of this game, although I'm hoping that they don't change the art style too much. In any case, as long as they don't go the same route as the Mineral Town remake, it should look pretty good. Now let's look at where I think the games take the biggest divergence from each other: game story and gameplay. Story-wise, Animal Parade is not too different from Tree of Tranquility. The island is decaying and you have to collect certain items for each of the harvest sprites to be able to restore the island to its former glory. In Tree of Tranquility, the sprites summon rainbows, but in this version you have to locate and ring differently colored bells. Each bell represents a different element, and every time you ring one, there's a noticeable difference on the island afterwards. Compared to Tree of Tranquility, you do feel the decay of the island a lot more in this entry. For instance, at the start of the game, certain items are not available until you've rung the bells to unlock them. There are also a few characters that only show up after ringing certain bells. Similar to Tree of Tranquility, but not nearly as many characters, thankfully. And they don't take forever and a day to move in either. In Tree of Tranquility, we're told that the waters surrounding the island are too hostile for people to enter or leave, until the first rainbow stops that from happening. But it doesn't feel as urgent to your progress in the game until you really start feeling the need for the rucksack upgrade. When you go to purchase seeds from Ruth in Tree of Tranquility, she says that the soil quality isn't too good, but you can still buy a large selection of seeds and fertilizers from her and harvest high-level crops. Whereas in Animal Parade, you have to slowly make progress with the bells in order to access more seeds and higher quality fertilizer. You also don't have access to the forge or cooked foods until you restore the first bell. In Tree of Tranquility, with the exception of the first one, the rainbows largely feel like a side quest that you don't really have to fixate on too much to enjoy the game. But in Animal Parade, the bells feel more tied into what you can and can't do in your day-to-day life on and off the farm. The townspeople similarly lament a lot more about the state of the island in this entry. Even at the start of the game, Finn's constant prodding to go see the harvest goddess and get the plot moving makes the task at hand feel much more urgent than Tree of Tranquility's slow easing into it. In my Tree of Tranquility review, I mentioned that I like the slower pace of introducing the player to the game and characters before jumping straight into the plot, and playing through Animal Parade, I still maintain that stance. In Animal Parade, Finn the Harvest Sprite, before you even name your character, is urging you to go talk to the goddess. I prefer the layer of mystery surrounding the goddess and how cryptic her messages in Tree of Tranquility were. I'm being a bit nitpicky here, and I do like how the plot is presented in Tree of Tranquility more, but Animal Parade does do a better job of executing it overall, rush start notwithstanding. Plenty of people complain about how long the tutorial is in Tree of Tranquility, so I'm sure that they appreciate the fact that Animal Parade just throws you into the game and lets you do your thing. But I don't mind a bit of a tutorial to at least outline the basics, and I also thought that it was good world building. Instead of a proper tutorial, you have books on your bookshelf that teach you how to do most everything that there is to do in Animal Parade. I'm not really the type to check out optional tutorials, much to my detriment in this case. Since I was already playing Tree of Tranquility, I assumed that everything in regards to farming would be essentially the same, only to then find out that I was completely wrong. The farming gameplay is a little different in this entry. Instead of the 1x6 system that we got used to in Tree of Tranquility, here each seed bag is one seed, which means that you plant each seed individually instead of 6 at a time like in Tree of Tranquility. A change that I highly appreciated. In Tree of Tranquility, because your crops wouldn't all grow at the same speed, you'd constantly have empty spots on your field after harvesting them that you couldn't refill unless you didn't mind wasting seeds, since all seeds are sold 6 to a bag. Maybe in the late game I wouldn't have cared about that, but at the start of the game where money is so hard to come by? Absolutely not. So Animal Parade's single seed bag is a lot more efficient. They also changed the camera angle while you farmed, which was great because I wasn't a huge fan of the sideways angle in Tree of Tranquility. But one change that I'm not crazy about is, so in Tree of Tranquility you unlock the ability to water multiple crops as you raise your skill level. And while upgrading your watering can uses up less stamina and it can hold more water, you can still water multiple crops even with a lower level watering can. Not in Animal Parade. Skill perks can only be used when you have the corresponding tool upgrade. This isn't something that we haven't seen in previous Harvest Moon entries, but it felt so dirty in this game after I got used to the way it was in Tree of Tranquility. made all the more egregious by the fact that it's so much more difficult to acquire upgrades in this game. In Tree of Tranquility, you have the option of purchasing tool upgrades from the general store. It wasn't the most efficient way to get them because they were so much more expensive, but if you had a hard time finding ores in the mine, then at least there was still a way for you to get the tools. Not in Animal Parade. The only way to get the tool upgrades is to get ores from the mines, which if you've played any of the other games in the series or farming sims in general, you're not going to be shocked by this revelation. But for whatever reason, acquiring the ores you need is a lot more difficult in this game. The mining itself is not any harder than it is in previous entries, and you do have a lot more stamina in this version compared to Tree of Tranquility, where you could pass out from breathing the wrong way. But mining in Tree of Tranquility, barring the stamina issue, was pretty simple. You have to refine the ores you find into usable materials in both games, but in Tree of Tranquility, the ores that could be refined into good materials all sparkled, whereas the ones that held only junk were dull. That meant that you could ignore all the ores that did not sparkle and know precisely when you'd collected enough ores to get your preferred tool upgrade. Heck, even if just to collect ores for accessories, it made the process so much simpler, and you wouldn't waste time or rucksack space on ores you couldn't use. But say it with me now, not in Animal Parade. The ores do not sparkle here, and you have no way of knowing whether any of them will turn out to be useful or not until you go refine them. I spent 2 whole days inside of the mine collecting gold ores, only for all of them to turn out to be junk. All of them! Every single one! I had 34 pieces of gold, all junk. Did I mention that you have to pay a fee to refine ores in this game? It was free in Tree of Tranquility, just saying. It's funny because Animal Parade starts off so much easier than Tree of Tranquility. You have a lot more stamina, it's easier to make money, and you're even gifted a barn and coop straight from the beginning, along with a free cow to boot. Something that took me until fall in Tree of Tranquility to be able to acquire because it's so hard to make money in that game. Yet I found that by the end of the first year, I had a lot more going for me in Tree of Tranquility than in Animal Parade. I had already purchased 2 of the 3 additional fields, I had way more animals and a lot more money, and though I wasn't done with the main story yet, there wasn't too much left for me to do, whereas in Animal Parade, yes, I'd finished the main story, but I still only had the basic barn and coop, had yet to get any of the additional fields, and was much further behind in befriending the townspeople. It may sound like I've only been complaining about Animal Parade until now, and granted there are a lot of things I wish they hadn't changed from Tree of Tranquility, but I do actually like how I felt like I did so much in the first year, only to realize that in the grand scheme of things, I had only just scratched the surface of what there was to complete in the game. It's a skill to have so much variety in a game without overwhelming the player. Animal Parade keeps the scope of certain mechanics locked up or even hidden in plain sight, but only presents it to the player when they've made enough progress to take it in. Before we move on from the gameplay section, there's an elephant in the room that I've avoided talking about until now. Unlike Tree of Tranquility that moves at a pretty brisk pace, in Animal Parade, time moves a lot slower. You're either gonna love it or you're gonna hate it. I can sympathize with the people that feel that time moves too fast in Tree of Tranquility. There were certainly times where I was scrambling to get around the island to meet up with someone, or trying to finish a task and cursing the game for not giving me more time to complete it. And I've already seen some people say that they should make the days longer in a few indie games. But me? I hate it. I'm sorry. On the one hand, the island in Animal Parade is huge, and it takes forever to get from one side of the island to the other, and you won't have access to shortcuts until much later in the game. If they didn't slow time down as much as they did, it would have been a nightmare to try and get anything done. And with how much bigger the starter field is in Animal Parade, I can imagine that it would take more than half the day just to water your crops, particularly because you can't use upgraded skill perks without an upgraded watering can. One issue I did run into when I played Tree of Tranquility for the first time is that if I was watering multiple fields, it was a huge time investment. That's why when I replayed it this time around, I used my extra fields to grow fruit trees that required no maintenance instead. I couldn't make nearly as much money, but it was much more time efficient. Mining for ores is another area where I appreciate the extra time. But on the other hand, I mentioned before that this game feels laggy. The map is a lot larger than Tree of Tranquility's, and if you play both games back to back, Tree of Tranquility runs a lot smoother. It feels nicer to play through. This is the one area where Tree of Tranquility is the clear winner to me, because it can feel like such a slog to get through even a single day in Animal Parade. Time moving so much slower just makes the game as a whole feel slow and tedious at times. I don't know if the lag issue being fixed in a remake would completely change my opinion on how I feel about time moving so slow in this game. Sometimes I really just found myself done with all my chores and done with gifting people by midday, and it felt weird to send my character to bed so early. In Tree of Tranquility, if I didn't have anything in particular that I wanted to do that day, or I was waiting for something, I could go kill time by fishing or working part-time jobs. But in Animal Parade, they changed it so that only about 10 minutes pass while you're fishing, regardless of how long it takes for something to bite, and there are no part-time jobs. I don't know if it's just a me problem, but I just felt like I was constantly waiting to be able to see certain events or do certain things, and the day would just not end. This is my biggest gripe with this game. It doesn't make it unplayable, at least not for me, but I just couldn't help but notice how much more I looked forward to playing Tree of Tranquility, if only because I was able to get through so many more days and do so many more things in one sitting in comparison. And while I do think that the positive changes and additions outweigh the things I don't like about this game, I get it if it's a deal breaker for other people. Going back to the Rainbows vs. Bells plot mechanic, I like that in Animal Parade you need to solve puzzles in addition to gathering items to ring the bells. I enjoyed it a lot more actually, than only having to collect items. I also like how a lot of different townspeople are involved in the main story. For the most part, only Gil and the mayor were really involved in the main story in Tree of Tranquility. In some ways, finishing the main story is a lot easier in this game than in Tree of Tranquility, but I felt it was more engaging all the way through in comparison. The beauty of this game is that even if you do manage to finish the main story relatively quickly, you still have a lot of things to do. Admittedly, in Tree of Tranquility, things start to wind down fairly quickly once you get to the end of the main story. Unfortunately, I'm not the type that can just play a game without a larger goal to work towards. And I'm also not much of a completionist unless I can get special items or outfits out of it. So I was already reaching the limits of my interest in Tree of Tranquility as it got easier to make money and finish up the main story. But I was pleasantly surprised to realize that I still had a ton of other small goals I wanted to achieve after finishing the main story in Animal Parade. I'm gonna go off on a bit of a side tangent, but I promise it all comes back around to my main point. I want to touch upon some of the other games in the series that had a plot, namely Magical Melody and Harvest Moon DS, since they were released a few years before Tree of Tranquility and Animal Parade, because they have an overarching goal that needs to be achieved, and like I said, I need to have something to work towards. For as much as I like them though, I can't stand it when games lock me out of certain mechanics until after I finish the main plot. I bring this up because in Magical Melody and Harvest Moon DS, you need to save the Harvest Goddess before you can get married. This leaves me in quite the predicament because once I finish the main story and there's not much else to work towards, it demotivates me from continuing the game. A lot of the time I'll finish the main story, get married, and then I drop the game. Of course, depending on how engaging the cast of character is, I might play deeper into the game. But in these older titles, it's not often. So if the game has something to offer post-marriage, but I have nothing of note that I want to pursue, most of the time I'm just not gonna get to see it. What I really like about Tree of Tranquility and Animal Parade is that you can get married and have a family while still working towards the main story goal. Animal Parade in particular is great because you still have so much more to do even after completing the main story. Which brings me to the reason that this game is called Animal Parade, the circus side quest. On the topic of magical melody, for whatever reason, Mayor Theodore from that game is now a ringmaster, and he brings his circus to the island every season. In his side quest, you're tasked with finding his lost circus animals that are hiding all over the island. Even if finding them is relatively easy, each animal has a preferred dish that you have to prepare to be able to get them to go back home. Some of the dishes require seasonal ingredients, and unlike Tree of Tranquility, where for the most part, you could acquire rainbow ingredients outside of the season that they're typically available in Animal Parade, there is no flea market. At best, you might be able to get something during one of the animal or crop festivals, but otherwise you're stuck waiting until you can grow or purchase the product that you need. A lesson that I learned the hard way during the winter side quest, where Frosty the Snowman knocks on your door nearly every night of the season, asking for a carrot. A carrot that I did not have, because I didn't know that I would need it, but that's beside the point. The circus side quest is the one that you really want to focus on if you want to unlock the fast travel mechanic. Or you can just ride your animals around the island, which is what I did most of the time. I think that the circus side quest is fine. It encourages you to dabble into the cooking mechanic more if you'd largely ignored it up to that point like I did. I do wish that the fast travel was a little bit easier to unlock though. Did I mention that this island is huge? One might even argue that it's too big actually. Usually I wouldn't want to fast travel because I like being able to run into the townspeople on my way to and from locations. But in this game, if the townspeople go anywhere, they usually just teleport there. For those wondering, that is not the case in Tree of Tranquility. They actually walk around the map. Some of the changes made between these two games just disappoint me if I think about it for too long. Animal Parade feels a lot more disconnected in that sense, but I'll get more into that when we start talking about the townspeople later in the video. However, since we're already on the topic, let's talk about the other festivals in this game. Much like Tree of Tranquility, Animal Parade has between 3 to 4 festivals per season, and for the most part they share the same festivals, with the exception of the circus that replaces the flea market from that game. That being said, Animal Parade's festivals are much better in my opinion. While I'm not the biggest fan of the circus, I do think that it looks amazing. The animations are stellar, and I like checking it out whenever I manage to send back one of the lost animals. But since it's available every season, the novelty wears off pretty quickly. It is kinda crazy though that the circus is such a big part of the marketing for this game, and it's probably the side quest that I care the least about. That aside, the other festivals are pretty great. Despite sharing a lot of the same festivals as Tree of Tranquility, which in my previous review I mentioned were a bit lackluster, the festivals in Animal Parade are a lot more engaging. You have series mainstays like the Animal and Crop festivals, date festivals to help you get closer to your honey, like the Firefly and Moon Viewing festivals, and festivals to hang out with the townspeople like the Summer Festival and the New Year's Eve Festival. What I really like about Animal Parade is that they took existing festivals from the previous game and just elevated them to include a lot more activities. For example, during the Animal Festival, you have the standard livestock contest where you compete to see who has the best livestock. But then you also have the pet contest, and apart from that there's an animal race. Did I mention that you can ride any of your barn animals if you have enough hearts with them? Because that's a thing in this game, and it's not just limited to the contest. You can ride them around the whole island. Even less of a reason to own a horse. Another festival that benefits in this game is the crop contest. In this game, there are multiple categories to enter. There's a vegetable contest, a fruit contest, a flower contest, and even a cooking contest. In Tree of Tranquility, you have a lot of mini games you can play at some of the festivals, but I didn't like most of them, and the controls were a little all over the place for me. So I vastly prefer that in this game, they've opted for having additional contests to keep you engaged instead. I said earlier that I like having a goal to accomplish in these types of games, but I don't like it when said goals disrupt the gameplay for me. And thankfully that's not the case in this game. All of these optional contests give you something to strive for, while also being optional for those that don't care for them. And the best part is that there's literally a contest for pretty much any side activity that you could take a fancy in. There's fishing contests during the summer festival, a mining contest during the New Year's Eve festival. There's even a fashion contest, aka my personal favorite, which BT Dubs does make a comeback in Story of Seasons on the 3DS, but sadly, not in other titles. I love the festivals in this game. I did like the flea market quite a bit in Tree of Tranquility, and I'm sad that the art festival wasn't brought back, but I genuinely feel that Animal Parade elevated the festivals in every way. Even the romantic ones, that I found super lacking in Tree of Tranquility, are much better here. Not perfect, but better. Now let's briefly talk about my favorite aspect of this game. Before this game, it wasn't as if dressing up your character was completely absent in the series. In Tree of Tranquility, there were seasonal outfits, and when Shelly moved onto the island, you could buy different outfits and accessories to wear. However, those outfits were recolors of the two outfits that your character typically wears, and the accessories were pretty limited. Even before that though, you could get a few different outfits in games like Another Wonderful Life, More Friends of Mineral Town, and Harvest Moon DSQ, but again, they were mostly recolors. So when I saw that there were different styles of outfits in this game that you could purchase, oh, it was game over. Nothing will win me over faster in a farming sim, or any sim for that matter, than telling me I can dress my character however I want, whenever I want. There are way more outfits and accessories in this game that you can purchase than in Tree of Tranquility, and it's not even close. You also have additional outfits and accessories that you can only get during the New Year's Eve festival, and that was when I knew that I was in it for the long haul in this game. I need to get those outfits, and they're not cheap. But what really got me is that you can also dress up your kids. Excuse me? Hello? Tell me that's not the most adorable feature. And off the top of my head, I can't think of a single other game in the series that lets you dress up your kids. Isn't that crazy? They included this feature here for me specifically. Now granted, this game came out in 2008, and the fashion is a little dated, but I don't care. I'm still giving it a 10 out of 10. No notes. Interestingly enough, while you can play as one of the protagonists from Tree of Tranquility, you also have the option of picking one of the two new protagonists in this game. I'm partial to Molly, I just think she looks cuter, and I'm not really a fan of how this new outfit looks on the Tree of Tranquility protagonist. I know you can change the outfit later, but I always just associate her with Tree of Tranquility, so it feels weird to play as her in this multiverse. In addition to the returning characters from Tree of Tranquility, we have 3 new characters in this game: the Wizard, the Witch Princess, and the Harvest King, all of whom are romanceable. And for anyone who lamented that you couldn't marry the Harvest Goddess in Tree of Tranquility, you can in this game. My only gripe is that Ellie and Gray sadly are not in this version for whatever reason, but you couldn't romance them in Tree of Tranquility either, so I guess it's fine. For the most part, the returning characters are pretty similar to their Tree of Tranquility doppelgangers, with the exception of a few who have different jobs and slightly different personalities. Selena, for instance, is a lot more abrasive in Tree of Tranquility at the start than in Animal Parade, and Perry, who was the doctor's apprentice in Tree of Tranquility, is the priest at the church in this game. So there are a lot of minute changes in the characters, some more than others. I wish I could have gotten to know the characters better, but it's a lot harder to befriend people in this game than in Tree of Tranquility. In that game, you can befriend people pretty easily by just talking to them every day and working part-time jobs with them. But in this game, there are no part-time jobs, and the only way to raise their affection is by gifting them items and attending festivals together. This change was made more than likely because the last spell you need to finish the main story requires that you befriend a number of townspeople to get their wishes. And it's the last spell, so it can't be an easy task, right? But I have mixed feelings about this decision. By the time I got to the end of my playthrough, which was one in-game year for both games, I was not very friendly with most of the townspeople. On the one hand, it's good because now that I'm done with the main story, I can focus on befriending them. But on the other hand, compared to Tree of Tranquility, I don't feel as connected to the townspeople as I could be. It also made the rival marriages a lot more difficult to unlock. In Tree of Tranquility, it was fairly easy to activate the rival marriages. Too easy in some cases, but not in Animal Parade. It feels like they took those criticisms and fixed the issue by going in the complete opposite end of the spectrum. In Tree of Tranquility, you only need to activate 2 rival heart events, and you only need to have 3 hearts with your rival to unlock them. Something that you could quite literally stumble upon unintentionally like I did, simply by talking to your rival every day or working part-time with them. In this game, you need to activate 3 rival heart events and befriend your rival up to 7 hearts. As you can imagine, since you can only raise affection through gift giving, there's a lot more effort involved in activating the rival marriages. If you don't like rival marriages or you want to take your time choosing someone, then this is of course great. You can even decide to never activate them. But for me, I don't want to have to put in this much effort because this is one of the few games in the series where the rival couples have children, and I wanted to see them all. I know that it's a controversial feature, but I like my farming sims to be as immersive as possible. So I personally love rival marriages, rival children, and anything that makes a town feel more alive. One thing about Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life, especially the remake, but I'll leave that rant for another video, that always felt strange to me is that for as in-depth as they made the child raising system, for a game that's supposed to be focused on family and interpersonal relationships, the rivals did not marry. Time passes, people get older, but none of the rivals actually get together or have kids, and it just feels like you're living in an isolated bubble. I know that because of software limitations, they couldn't include everything they wanted to in that game. I genuinely feel like with both Tree of Tranquility and this game, but especially here, they did their darndest to include parts of that system and flesh out the characters as much as they could. That being said, I'm still salty about the fact that there are no heart events in this game. In my Tree of Tranquility review, I expressed dissatisfaction with the relationship mechanic because we don't really get to know the characters as well as in previous titles. It's a little bit better here than in Tree of Tranquility, but I did marry the wizard this time around, so it's hard to say exactly how much of an improvement the different events are since I didn't marry the same bachelor. But I did enjoy the wooing process more in this version. It also helps that after marriage, you can raise your spouse's affection up 10 more hearts, which was not a thing in Tree of Tranquility. Like always, I still think the dialogue is very repetitive. I would hope that if we do eventually get a remake for this game, that they add in more dialogue and events to flesh the characters out more. But considering their track record with the 2 remakes we've had so far, I'm not holding my breath. Minor complaints aside, I really do love this cast of characters. There's a great variety amongst the marriage candidates, regardless of which gender you're playing as. I like all of the townspeople, and I do think it's worth it to expend the effort to befriend them. The rival marriages and rival children make the island feel a lot more dynamic, and the added heart levels with your spouse help alleviate some of my distaste for the lack of heart events. Before we wrap things up, and I know this video is already long as it is, but I would be doing this game a disservice if I didn't bring it up. I've compared this game a bit to Harvest Moon: A Wonderful Life, and it's not just because it was one of the more recent titles before this game was released. I really do think that A Wonderful Life had a lot of influence on how the team approached making Tree of Tranquility and Animal Parade. The biggest indicator of this for me is how each game approaches your character's child. Tree of Tranquility was already pretty great. You could have one of 5 different types of kids depending on who you married, and they all had different looks and personalities. In earlier games, and even in later games, your child would look the same regardless of who you married, though there are a few exceptions. And more often than not, they would always have the same personality, which is why A Wonderful Life stands out so much in the series. Animal Parade takes it a step further than Tree of Tranquility by not only including different personality types, but now your children actually look like your spouse, and you're not limited to just one personality type per spouse either. In addition to that, you can have more than one child, and yes, you can dress them up too. It's not as in-depth as A Wonderful Life where you have more control over your child's personality from chapter to chapter, but I do think that in the entire series, it's the most fleshed out in terms of having a unique family. So if we zoom out and look at everything that this game has to offer, Minor complaints notwithstanding, I can't think of a single farming sim I've played that has as wide a variety to offer as Harvest Moon Animal Parade. If you're more into the day-to-day gameplay aspects of the series, you are more than welcome to pursue that. You can finish the main story, you can do the side quests, you can become the winner of every single contest, and if you want to focus on the social aspects, you can befriend and matchmake to your heart's content, and have a well-dressed family to boot. I love this game to bits, and I only regret that I waited so long to pick it back up. If we do eventually get a remake, I genuinely hope that they don't take out the rival marriages or children like they did in the Mineral Town remake. I just can't imagine the game without it. There are definitely issues with the lag, and I wouldn't blame anyone for finding it too egregious to play through. But if I had to choose between a remake or a port, just to preserve the things I like about this game, I'd choose the port hands down. Thank you to everyone who's made it this far in this video. I know it's a long one, but I just had so much to say about this game. I wasn't anticipating to like it as much as I did when I started this project, despite having played it before, mostly because I remembered how bad the lag was and because the social aspect is so important to me that I knew I would have complaints about the relationships in this game. But honestly, it's really fun. I would recommend it to anybody that likes farming sims. I haven't really decided what game to check out next, but it's probably going to be Fields of Mystria. So if you want to follow my progress with that, I'm on Blue Sky and Twitter at Remy Del Mare. I hope you all enjoyed the holidays, and I'll see you all when the stars align once more.